Okay, think about it. When a huge wildfire is tearing through a forest or a hurricane is barreling toward the coast, we all see the first responders, right? The firefighters, the paramedics, they're the heroes on the front lines. But have you ever wondered who's coordinating the whole thing? The person behind the curtain, kind of like the director of a movie, making sure everything from planning before the disaster to the recovery afterwards actually happens? Well, those folks are emergency managers. And honestly, they're the unsung heroes we all depend on when things go sideways.
So let's ask a really important question here. When a disaster hits your town, who's actually in charge? Who's the one calling the shots to manage all that chaos? You might think, oh, it's the mayor or maybe the fire chief. But the real answer, well, it's probably not who you think. And frankly, it might not be as comforting as you'd like to believe.
And we know this because, for the first time ever, a huge nationwide study has finally pulled back the curtain to see what's really going on with local emergency management in the US. And what they found? It's surprising, yeah, but it's also pretty troubling. We're talking about a system that's stretched to its absolute breaking point.
All right, so let's dig into the first major takeaway from this study. And it is a bombshell. It turns out that a huge number of the agencies we count on to save us, they're basically one-person armies. Literally.
Just let that sink in for a second. More than half of all local emergency management agencies in the entire country have just one full-time employee. Or, in some cases, zero. These are the people we've tasked with planning for and responding to the worst days imaginable for an entire community.
And, you know, this staffing crisis gets even worse when you look at our smallest communities. In towns with less than 50,000 people, which is a lot of America, a jaw-dropping 73% of these offices are a one-person show. Or sometimes they're just run by volunteers. They're doing everything all by themselves. Look, this isn't just about statistics. This is about real people. And you can hear the strain in this quote from one of the local directors in the study. It's basically a cry for help. It really shows you the incredible pressure these folks are under every single day, trying to keep their communities safe with practically no backup.
Okay, so what does being this understaffed actually look like on a daily basis? Well, it means these incredibly important planners are just getting buried in paperwork. They're being pulled in a million different directions, none of which have to do with their real job.
So where is all their time going? Well, you can see here that preparedness is the biggest chunk, which makes sense. But look at the next biggest slice. Administrative work, a full 21% of their time. That's 1/5 of their entire job spent on paperwork, not on planning for disasters. It's just a huge drain.
And a huge piece of that admin nightmare is grants. I mean, listen to this director. The paperwork to get federal money is so complicated and time-consuming that sometimes it's just not worth it. So the smallest agencies, the ones who desperately need that funding, they often just throw up their hands and don't even bother applying.
You know, all this daily chaos leads to another giant problem that the study found. It's called mission creep. Basically, because everyone sees these emergency managers as the go-to fix-it person in local government, they get handed all sorts of jobs that have nothing to do with emergencies. It completely pulls them away from what they're supposed to be doing.
And the list of these extra duties is, well, it's pretty wild. The study found them doing everything from coordinating snow removal and managing the 911 dispatch center to leading the local response to the opioid crisis and homelessness. I mean, these are huge, complex problems on their own, and this is where it gets really dangerous. This director here just nails it. Every single hour they spend on one of those other tasks is an hour they can't spend on their actual job, like, you know, updating an evacuation plan or running a critical disaster drill. And all those distractions, they leave all of us more vulnerable. But okay, what if it didn't have to be this way? The study didn't just focus on the problems, it also asked these dedicated pros, hey, what would you do if you actually had the staff and the money you needed? And their answers, they paint this really powerful picture of what a safer community could look like. And this really shows you the massive gap between where things are and where they could be. You see the current reality, just constantly reacting, drowning in paperwork with no time to talk to the public. But then look at their aspirations. They want to be doing strategic planning, getting out in the community, running more training and exercises, actually preparing for the future.
This quote from a director just says it all, doesn't it? They're not just trying to keep their head above water. They want to think bigger. They want to be out in the community, building real, long-term safety by actually planning 3 to 5 years down the road.
But it's really hard to think about the future when you've got this other massive problem looming. The study uncovered another huge risk, and it's this. There's almost no succession planning happening at all.
I mean, seriously, think about this. You've got someone who's been doing this job for over 20 years. All that knowledge about your town's specific risks, all those relationships, it's all in their head. What happens when they retire? Poof, all that priceless experience just walks right out the door, and the community is basically left starting from zero.
All right, so the problems are pretty clear, but what about the solutions? The great thing about this study is that it didn't just point out what's broken. It used all that data to figure out what actually works. It basically created a blueprint for what a successful, effective emergency management agency looks like. And the analysis boils it down to 3 key things. First, the most effective agencies are their own independent departments, not buried inside the fire or police department. Second, no surprise here, they have enough staff to actually do the job. And third, and this one's really interesting, they spend time not just on responding to a crisis, but on preparing for the recovery that comes after.
Now that last point, preparing for recovery, that might seem a little weird, right? Why would planning for what happens after a disaster be such a good sign of success before one even strikes?
Well, it's because planning for recovery isn't something that's usually required by grants or mandates. It's extra. So if an agency actually has the time and energy to focus on it, it's the ultimate sign that they're not just scrambling to survive. It proves they have the capacity to think strategically about the long-term health of their community. All right, so what's the big takeaway here? What do we need to remember from this first ever deep dive into our country's local emergency management system? It really boils down to this. Our local emergency management system is full of these unbelievably passionate and dedicated people. They are true heroes, but we're asking them to do an impossible job. They're fighting against huge systemic problems. Not enough money, not enough staff, and that crazy mission creep we talked about. And that puts every single one of our communities at risk. And that leaves us all with a final, really important question to ask ourselves. Look at your own community. Is it treating emergency management like a top priority now? Or is it just hoping for the best and waiting for a disaster to strike before it decides to invest in safety? Because when it comes to disasters, the time to prepare is always before the storm hits.